The National Strike Committee and the Colombian government have reached pre-agreements ahead of talks to end almost a month of widespread protest. Mexico and Argentina are making progress in the production of vaccines against COVID-19, which will benefit the people of Latin America and the Caribbean. Presidential elections are underway in Syria. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm Gladys Quesada. We begin with the news. The National Strike Committee and the Colombian government reached pre-agreements late on Monday, which the government said it hopes will lead to talks to end almost a month of widespread protest. Following a 12-hour meeting, both sides noted that there are several points on which there is still no consensus, which will be addressed later in the process. The National Strike Committee, made out of major unions and student groups, has repeatedly expressed its willingness to enter talks to bring an end to the ongoing mobilizations. But the talks held thus far have failed to make any major progress, given the government's refusal to address the main concerns raised by the population and bring a stop to the brutal repression by security forces against protesters who have been mobilizing throughout the country since April 28th to denounce the neoliberal policies of the Ivan Duque government.
A pre-agreement on guarantees for the exercise of the right to protest. After 9 days of talks, we made progress on several important commitments. On other issues, we left to note that they will be submitted for their analysis later on, and we established working and monitoring groups. We have reached a pre-agreement that provides a general framework on the guarantees for the protests, and that allows us to install and start negotiations on the emergency plan presented by the National Strike Committee.
After 28 days of national strike in Colombia this Tuesday, human rights defender Juan Grabois was refused to enter the country. Juan Grabois, member of the International Mission of Solidarity and Observation of Human Rights, was denied access to the country. Grabois is part of the mission that arrived in Colombia for the purpose of preparing a detailed report on recent crimes, violations and disappearances to make them visible and to denounce at the international level as provided for the Istanbul Protocol signed by the Colombian state itself. And studies released by the United Nations reveal that poverty in Latin America has reached its highest level in 20 years, with a 12.5% decline in the quality of life of the region's inhabitants. According to research by the UN experts, the negative indicators in Latin America soared under the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, where up to 26.1% of the population cannot cover their food needs. According to the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, poverty and extreme poverty in 2020 reached levels not seen in the last 12 and 20 years, respectively. There was also a worsening of the inequality indices and soaring rates of unemployment, especially among women, which reached figures of almost 40%. Sixteen people were killed in an attack in the eastern province of Satipo in Peru. Police authorities have blamed criminal links to drug trafficking, while the Ministry of Defense points to an alleged terrorist attack by the Shining Path movement. Despite the claims by the Ministry of Defense, the evidence and investigations collected by police point to the clear participation of drug trafficking gangs that operate in the valley of the Apurimac, Ene and Mantaro rivers, a region of the Peruvian Amazon. Several political and social sectors have denounced the massacre, among them presidential candidate Pedro Castillo, who urged the police to find the whereabouts of those responsible. Likewise, his far-right contender Keiko Fujimori expressed her solidarity with the families of the victims. The attack came just 2 weeks before the presidential election. The United Nations also condemned the violence. This Tuesday, the Justice and Human Rights Commission of the Peruvian Congress summoned representatives of the Ministries of Defense, the Interior, Justice and Human Rights, and also the Public Prosecutor's Office to be informed of the measures taken following the massacre in Satipo province. The extraordinary session is set to hear from the authorities regarding the response to and investigation of the incident on Wednesday afternoon. In the United States, 1 year after the murder of Afro-descendant George Floyd by the police, groups of protesters gather in the streets to honor his memory and continue claims for racial justice. In Minneapolis, the city where Floyd died, those present dedicated a minute of silence to the memory of the man who was killed in the middle of a police operation on May 25, 2020, immobilizing him against the ground for more than 9 minutes, causing his death. In other parts of the country, such as in Los Angeles and New York, supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement gathered to demonstrate for racial justice after a year of protests against police brutality. The Floyd family met with President Joe Biden and members of Congress at the White House to continue advances in police reform legislation in the country. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away.
Who's moving the chess man? What interests and motivate the actors behind each event? The board is deployed there. Critical Move investigates every event from Monday to Friday. Only on teleSUR. Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali analyzes the international media influence driven by the empire, acts as an analysis of political, economic and social life throughout Latin America through our stream and website in English. A critical space committed to truth to determine the conjuncture that moved the world today. The World Today. Mondays on teleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. Mexico and Argentina are making progress in the production of vaccines against COVID-19, which will benefit the people of Latin America and the Caribbean. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, speaking at his morning press conference on Tuesday, informed that alongside Argentina, Mexico is producing the vaccine developed by the Swedish-British pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca and Oxford University. The president noted that doses are being produced to distribute across the region. He also clarified that this is the result of an agreement signed last August to transport the active ingredient being produced in Argentina to Mexico, where it is packaged before its final distribution.
Together in several fields and in a very remarkable way in retaliation to health and vaccination. We are producing the AstraZeneca vaccine in collaboration with the Oxford University, the government of Argentina, the government of Mexico, and the Carlos Slim Foundation.
Mexico will ship the first batch of AstraZeneca vaccines jointly manufactured by laboratories in the two countries to Argentina this weekend, following the agreement signed in August last year, whose implementation had suffered delays.
Truth is that I feel, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, that with this announcement that we are making, we are becoming more independent in Mexico, Argentina, and Latin America. There are no borders. I would say we are together in the same cause, seeking the welfare of our peoples. This weekend, Mexico will receive 800,000 and Argentina the other 800,000, half and a half, because it was agreed in August 2020. From then on, the plant will be producing in Mexico will be supplying Argentina, Mexico, and also many Latin American countries that make contacts with AstraZeneca.
International non-governmental organization Oxfam presented a report in Havana on Tuesday, revealing the impact of nearly 6 decades of sanctions imposed by successive U.S. governments on the Cuban population, and underlining the consequences of the blockade on the daily lives of Cubans, particularly women. The report, titled Right to Life Without a Blockade, states that 78% of girls and women living on the island were born under the U.S. sanctions and suffer an increased burden both in the domestic and professional fields due to the limitations it poses. 46% of women in Cuba are heads of households, which means they hold jobs to make an income away from the home, in addition to being chiefly responsible for domestic chores. They also the majority of the specialized workforce, and in fields such as health, they represent 70% of those who work in the sector. The Oxfam report is based in part on information provided by the Center for Cuban Economy of the University of Havana and features testimonies that illustrate the consequences of the blockade on the daily lives of all people in Cuba, especially women.
Oxfam in Cuba has been limited by the embargo of the United States in several opportunities, even during and even more during the response to humanitarian crisis. For example, hurricanes, the tornado a couple of years ago, and the COVID and the pandemic, the COVID-19. I will have the opportunity to speak to the new administration, to President Biden, to Vice President Harris. I will say you have a unique opportunities today. After more than 1 year of pandemic, of the COVID-19, after almost 60 years of sanctions against Cuba, today you have the opportunity to change the history. Vice President Harris, you are the first woman to have this role in the United States. Women and young women are the most affected by the embargo in Cuba.
After the coup d'etat in Mali on Monday, a military junta was set up which will govern until new elections are held next year. This was announced by Colonel Assimi Goïta, who led the coup against the government of Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, while assuring that these measures were adopted in the face of the exclusion suffered by him and several senior military commanders in the transitional government. Goïta arrested the interim president Bandoua and the premier Mokhtar Ouane hours after the structuring of the new government became known. Faced with this situation, the international community has been quick to condemn this coup and denounces the establishment of the military junta. And the special envoy of the Economic Community of West African States, Goodluck Jonathan, arrived in Mali's capital on Tuesday to hold talks with military leaders, a day after the arrest of the country's transitional president and the prime minister by the military junta that led the August 2020 coup. The Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security of the ECOWAS Commission, Francis Benjamin, also traveling to the country, stated that the crisis in Mali is multidimensional, and the mediation team was going there to find out what was happened. The arrest of the transitional government figures came after 2 army officers were replaced by civilians in a government reshuffle on Monday. President Bandua and Prime Minister Mokhtar Ouane had been heading an interim government that was installed in September under the threat of regional sanctions following the coup, with the declared aim of restoring full civilian rule within 18 months.
Well, there are some few developments that ECOWAS is a bit worried. And as the team that is mediating, we need to come and listen to our people, what is happening. We cannot say anything very definite now until we have a discussion with the people, the civil society, citizens of Mali, the military, and those who were in government. After this conversation, then we will have something definite to tell the media.
Bamako residents reacted after civil leaders of the transition were arrested by military coups.
We are fed up with this constant arrest by the military. They attack people, either to kill them or they arrest them, and we never know why.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us.
¿Qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on teleSUR. The life is full of moments. Moments of fight. Moments of hope. Moments that transcend. Moments that you can live in. teleSUR documentaries. Sundays. Only on teleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. Syrians went to the polls on Wednesday to elect their next president. Voters cast their ballots in more than 12,000 polling stations, and results are expected to be announced by Friday evening, 48 hours after voting closes. The current Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, who is expected to win a 4th term in office, was first elected by referendum in 2000 after the death of his father Hafez. In these elections, the head of state faced former state minister Abdallah Salom Abdallah and the opposition candidate Mahmoud Meri. According to electoral authorities, voting day went smoothly and without any incidents. President Bashar al-Assad cast his vote at the polling station in the town of Douma, just outside of Damascus. The negotiations to save the nuclear deal between Iran and the world powers resume in Vienna this Tuesday. The talks aim at bringing the United States back to the deal after former President Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew in 2018 and reimposed sanctions on Iran are being held at a hotel in the Austrian capital and attended by representatives of Germany, China, France, the United Kingdom, Russia and Iran. The talks are coordinated by Spanish diplomat Enrique Mora on behalf of the European Union. The negotiations to save the pact began in early April, and this new session came a day after Iran and the International Atomic Energy Agency extended the agreement to allow inspections of the Islamic Republic's nuclear program for another month. Iran has stressed that it is ready to return to its commitments under the deal as soon as the United States lifts all sanctions and without any conditions. Chinese President Xi Jinping reiterated his country's support for Iran's reasonable demands concerning a return to under the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the nuclear deal. The president held a telephone conversation with his Iranian counterpart Hassan Rouhani, in which he also stressed that China will continue to support Iran in its efforts to fight the COVID-19 epidemic, and condemned the unilateral sanctions imposed by the United States against Iran. Meanwhile, the Iranian president thanked China for its support in the negotiations for a return to the Comprehensive Plan of Action, as well as its support in tackling COVID-19. Palestinian authorities released the final death toll from the 11th day military attack on Sloth against the occupied and blockaded Gaza Strip on Monday. According to the Health Ministry, the death toll rose to 253, including 66 children, 39 women, and 17 elderly people. Nearly 2,000 people were injured in Israel's latest attack on Palestinians living in the Strip. After the declaration of a ceasefire as a result of Palestinian resistance and international pressure, the Palestinian people are preparing to once again rebuild and mourning their lost one. On Tuesday, activists gathered to begin collecting the rubble and debris of buildings that were destroyed in the Israeli regime's strikes. As U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken began a tour of the Middle East this Tuesday, the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas stressed that the United States must put pressure on Israel to stop its crimes against the Palestinian people.
What is asked from the visit of the U.S. Secretary of State is to show a clear U.S. position in the face of the Zionist aggression against our people and our holy sites, as well as to stop supporting the occupation and giving it a cover to continue its aggressive behavior, whether in Jerusalem or the Gaza Strip. All parties that seek to stabilize calm in the Gaza Strip must put pressure on the Zionist occupation, which caused the situation in the region to explode during the recent escalation that targeted Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. The policy of the U.S. has long been known, and it is a policy that has always supported the Zionist entity. The U.S. sees the Zionist entity as the only entity worth supporting. They do not stand with the oppressed, but rather with the oppressor.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas received U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken in Ramallah on Tuesday as part of his Middle Eastern tour. Blinken said the United States will rebuild its relations with Palestine by reopening a consulate in Jerusalem and giving millions in aid to help the war-ravaged Gaza Strip in a bid to mark a break with the policy of former President Donald Trump, despite the Biden administration's continued support of the illegal Israeli regime. The top U.S. diplomat also reiterated support for Israel's supposed right to defend itself against the Palestinian resistance movement, Hamas, which he said must not benefit from the aid effort. Meanwhile, a senior Palestinian official said a U.S. Palestine committee was also discussing how to reopen the Palestine Liberation Organization office in Washington. It was closed during the Trump administration.
Committed to peaceful popular resistance, reject violence and terrorism in any form, and we only want peaceful ways to reach a political solution between us and Israel. We hope that the future will be full of diplomatic and political activities headed by the United States and the International Quartet in order to reach a just, comprehensive and complete solution in accordance with international legitimacy. On our part,
Palestinians gathered in the center of the West Bank city of Ramallah to protest against the visit of the U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken on Tuesday. Meanwhile, just hours before Blinken's arrival, Israeli occupation forces killed a Palestinian man during an arrest raid on the Amara refugee camp near Ramallah. Israeli police, who operate in the occupied East Jerusalem and across Israel, said late Sunday they had arrested over 1,500 suspects over the past 2 weeks in connection with what they call violent events, and in what analysts have stressed is a crackdown on Palestinians demonstrating against the Zionist regime.
So-called human rights that it uses as a cover for its malicious policies. It aims at continuing to divide the Palestinian people and continuing to support the Zionist entity and depriving the Palestinian people of their right to defend themselves and their comprehensive resistance. Even if the American, British or Greek foreign ministers visit, our goal remains the same, and that's final. Our goal is Jerusalem only. We are not interested in either an American or a British foreign minister. All that is happening here is to no avail.
And more than 70,000 families in Marawi City remain displaced in the Philippines 4 years after an Islamic State-inspired terrorist siege drove them from their homes. In May 23, 2017, Marawi was caught in a 5-month-long battle against terrorists. At that time, non-stop gunfire and bombings between state forces and the terrorist group led to the total destruction of the city and the loss of hundreds of lives from both sides. According to the government, at least 65% of the city's rehabilitation has been completed, while the remainder is on track to finish by the end of the year.
A proposed compensation bill in Congress. It is being deliberated upon in the lower house, and it is called compensation bill. Once becomes a law, then all affected families will be provided with financial assistance.
And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please follow us for all the latest news on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. And you can catch up on our working shows on our YouTube channel. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.